I want to start by travelling back 5 years to the last few days before the pandemic hit, when actually probably many of us on the call here today were
Yes.
gathered together physically for the publication of a housing design audit for England. And the audit reviewed 142 large-scale housing-led projects across England, and led to national headlines at the time that as a nation we were failing on design quality. But not all of the housing was revealed to be poor quality by the audit, as many projects around the country were in fact classified as good or even very good by the auditors. However, when correlated against relative affluence and sales values, it was apparent that these were much more often expensive homes in affluent areas, whilst disadvantaged areas routinely suffered the sort of lowest quality housing environments. Now, the consequence of this, I think, became obvious when we published a second study in 2020, this time reflecting on the experience of lockdown on people's health and well-being at a time when you'll all remember we were forced to spend a lot longer in our homes and in our home neighbourhoods. Now, Home Comforts concluded that not only were the newest dwellings the most uncomfortable during that time, but disadvantaged communities routinely came off worse, with profound consequences for their health and well-being. Two factors seem to be key. First, the private market quite simply works less well in such places, with lower land values leading proportionally to lower investment in all aspects of residential design, so that quality is squeezed out of private development and associated affordable housing, or house building simply becomes unviable. And second, as our more recent studies have shown, this has been perpetuated in large parts of the country by the austerity-driven disengagement of the public sector from the governance of design quality through proactive planning, leading to an over-reliance on regulatory functions of planning and highways, and resulting in the delivery of substandard market products and roads-dominated residential layouts, a story that we all know very well. But returning to the audit, critically, when correlating quality against affluence and sales values, we noticed that there were a very small number of outliers that seemed to break the trend. And this raised the question, how exactly were they doing that? Well, it's taken 5 years to deliver an answer, essentially by seeking out the elusive projects where design quality has been successfully delivered in disadvantaged areas and learning the lessons from those experiences. So what did we do? Well, first we needed to track down stories of success by inviting nominations from external parties. And initially, we asked the networks of the Urban Design Group, the TCPA, and Civic Voice to make nominations of well-designed developments in disadvantaged areas, without actually defining exactly what we meant by either disadvantage or design quality at that stage. A particular thanks to Robert Huxford and Ian Harvey for all their support on that aspect of the work and actually throughout the whole project. Next, we supplemented this with a trawl of recent competition winning schemes to see if there were any likely projects that we could glean from those sources as well. And then from our long list, we applied eligibility rules relating to development size, disadvantage, and quality. So size was the easiest. We wanted a critical mass of homes, and we decided to set a limit of a lower limit of at least 30 new homes in a development. For disadvantage, we adopted a threshold of projects in deciles 1 to 4 of the index of deprivation, or in local authorities in the bottom 25% nationally. And for quality, we combined an external audit of all of the schemes utilising the same 17 criteria that had been used in the National Housing Audit, with a Healthy Homes review using the TCPA's criteria and methodology. And a massive thanks to Rosalie and Sally at the TCPA for all their invaluable input on that front. And we took a score of good in the audit as the threshold for inclusion of projects in the study. In other words, not every project that we looked at would necessarily win awards for design quality, although many in fact had, but they all represented a sizable step up from what would normally be achieved in such locations and therefore were worthy of inclusion in the study. The 20 projects that we ended up with cover every region in England. They were led and developed in a diversity of ways. They encompass different tenures and combinations of tenures. They're located in a diversity of areas from central to outer suburban areas. And with regard to density, they range from 30 to 245 dwellings per hectare, but tended to cluster, I would suppose, in a sort of mid-density range with an average of 72 dwellings per hectare. And we captured the stories of those involved through a series of extended semi-structured group interviews covering the full development process from design vision to project delivery, always with a particular emphasis on trying to understand the economics of projects. All to answer our core research question: how do some housing-led developments in economically and socially disadvantaged areas manage to buck the trend of substandard design and deliver high-quality, inclusive and sustainable urban development? So, to cut to the chase, after much gathering and crunching of interview data and other data, it became obvious that the journeys of the different projects were clustering around a number of common paths in the form of what we call 10 routes to success. I'll briefly introduce these, beginning with the first 6, which one might say are broadly concerned with the making of the development opportunity. Starting with route 1, creating place and value through design. So this, in a sense, describes the sort of classic regeneration path of reinventing post-industrial areas to reset perceptions of them with the hope of defining a completely new market. Here, we were talking about large-scale placemaking, but with an inbuilt flexibility to allow for inevitable swings in the prevailing economic environment. So Rochester Riverside and Portloop in Birmingham offer good examples, both of which saw the front-loading of key public realm interventions to make a statement about the quality of the places being created and involved a certain patience to forego short-term returns in favour of enhanced long-term benefits. And because of this, there is some increased short-term risk, but that can be offset by early public sector loans and grants and a flexible approach to making a return on the sale of public land. Route 2 is related and involves building a market through architectural innovation, which appeals to some segments of the market, including environmental pioneers that are looking for something different. This means differentiating projects either functionally, as is occurring in the Leeds Climate Innovation District, and I think the title of that project says it all, or stylistically and typologically as regards the sort of form of homes being delivered, as was the case in Manchester's roof gardens, where back-to-back townhouses with gardens on their roofs help to define a sort of new local market. By definition, this involves a sort of less tried and tested path and therefore carries some technical and market risk. It also requires the involvement of architects with the capability to push design boundaries and developers motivated to support them on that journey. The third route an entrepreneurial public sector sharing the risk in partnership involves some form of joint venture partnership that combines the high ambitions and land holdings of the public sector with the development know-how and resources of private developers. In the rise in Newcastle and Cutler's View in Sheffield, leadership came from suitably entrepreneurial public sector housing companies interested in delivering new market and a new market and housing alongside affordable homes, and in making a sort of profit to reinvest themselves in more new homes. In both, the potential of a long-term and large-scale rebalancing of city neighbourhoods that had previously been over-dominated by disadvantaged groups and social housing first required that they were opened up to new investment. And to do this, both housing companies worked alongside a private partner with a social conscience who was willing to make their own long-term investment in these council-led projects, and in the bargain got first dibs, so to speak, on the council land. Route 4 we snappily titled Utilising Underutilised Public Infill Plots in High Value but Deprived Locations. And this relates to the particular case of deprivation stemming from, amongst other things, the high costs of housing in many parts of the country, and the urgent need to deliver more affordable homes in such places with their prohibitive land values. The answer comes from rationalising small public sector buildings and land holdings, including using incidental but poor quality public spaces and parking areas. And the stories here from Oxford and Greenwich are led by council-owned housing companies who otherwise would be unable to compete for land, albeit that these sorts of sites are rarely straightforward to develop because of their complex social, physical and functional contexts. But where this is occurring as a concerted strategy, significant numbers of new affordable homes and allied community benefits are being delivered in this way. The fifth route, cross-subsidising affordability and design quality, is a valid and important route, but perhaps one that we've come to over-rely on. This has occurred through our dependence on the sort of untapped value of sites with the sorts of locational advantages that make them attractive enough to private developers that they can subsidise affordable homes and high quality design from the land value hikes associated with their development or, often their redevelopment. It requires values, as was the case in Woodbury Down in Hackney, able to support private profits and a full range of public benefits, and private and public interest being willing to both see and share the value. Importantly, it also requires a public sector such as that in Nottingham that is determined to push for design quality, that recognises the potential of these sorts of sites to deliver, and which possesses the internal design skills and capacity and regulatory authority to do so, to push for design quality. The final route in this section, which we called simply public sector vision, leadership and funding, is in a sense the opposite. And rather than looking to the private sector to deliver public benefits, instead a strong local public sector takes on the mantle from inception through to delivery and long-term management in order to build essentially new council homes. These cases use a combination of affordable homes programme grants and public works loan board debts, topped up with right to buy receipts to deliver the new homes. And it helps when borrowing can be guaranteed against existing social housing income, but also against projected future rental income from the social housing, ultimately showing the power of the public sector to develop and deliver and lead a vision when the will exists to exercise that leadership, as was the case in Barking at the Gascoigne Estate or in Norwich at Goldsmith Street. Now, many, of course, have argued that this is something that we should have been doing a lot more of for decades. Which brings us to the last four routes that cluster in a group focused more on optimising the identified development opportunities. Starting with route 7 that focuses on shifting the economic equation through public intervention designed to stimulate private funding. Now, sometimes this is about bridging a funding gap, and some project teams, such as Leicester Waterside, have been remarkably adept at bringing a variety of different pots of funding together to do exactly that. But it might also involve suspending affordable housing requirements in areas where affordability is not such a problem, de-risking through forward selling, for example, into the build-to-rent market, incorporating shared ownership so that affordable housing funds can go a little further, or using overage agreements that offset income on the sale of public land in favour of a share of future profits. Now, this, in essence, is all about making the development opportunity more attractive. By contrast, the next two routes are about reducing the costs of development. So route 8, economies of scale across multiple sites, focuses on an approach that in housing has sometimes had a bad press, namely standardisation. Volume house builder standard ranges have often been derided as Anywhereville type homes, and we've yet to fully get over the negative associations left by post-war prefabrication. But standardisation also has a positive story to tell in the historic use of pattern book homes and components that still today carry a premium. In different ways, from whole homes manufactured off-site, as at Salford's Irwell Riverside, to the use of repeated components across sites, as in St Mary's Leicester, standardisation was an essential component of many of the 20 stories, done in a manner that allowed sufficient adaptation in order to differentiate and respond to local contexts. Now, while full-scale modular manufacturing has had a torrid time recently, sunk by the sort of stop-start nature of our housing industry, the gearing up of the public sector to deliver more new homes and the delivery of a new generation of new towns on the horizon means that standardisation is quite simply not something that we can ignore. And for a number of the projects in this report, it was the key to getting them built. With the ninth route, we're sort of getting into the nitty-gritty as it focuses on preemptively cutting costs through continual design interrogation and therefore avoiding crude value engineering late in the day, which often seems to happen. In essence, this is about interrogating specifications, procurement practices, and post-permissions delivery to cut out waste and optimise quality within the available budget. It involves a dual focus on quality and cost from the start and across the entire design development process, and taking a long-term approach, preferably a whole life approach, to value, alongside bearing down on short-term costs. Both the stories here, Oak Priory in Stoke and the Ridgeway in Hertford, empowered their designers to take such an approach, with both teams clear from the start about where compromise was possible and where it was not and should be resisted. And so to the final route, leveraging community ambition, which focuses on the essential role of communities and how to better engage them in defining the critical design parameters of projects, as well as defining a path to success that would deliver for them and for any incoming populations. The value of fundamental community engagement is, of course, difficult to overstate when it comes to overcoming distrust amongst communities and the associated resistance to development. Consequently, if for no other reason than to remove a potentially costly obstacle to change, establishing mechanisms for continual feed of community views into the design development and long-term management process of projects is critical and was fully embraced in projects such as Queen's Park in Blackpool. If this can be done in a manner that makes communities aware of the economic as well as the design parameters of schemes, as happened in the inquiry by design process at Bristol's Filwell Park, then all the better, because this helps communities to understand the necessary trade-offs and play their role in optimising design outcomes within given resources. So ultimately, we had 10 routes. And while this all looks rather neat, 10 routes, each with 2 stories of success, we also have to bear in mind that these routes relate to each other and, of course, overlap. And in theory, any one can be used in combination with any other. In practice, many of the stories could have been used to illustrate a variety of routes, but some routes in our limited selection of case studies were more widely utilised than others, notably Route 1, creating places and value through design, and Route 7, shifting the economic equation. These were followed by routes 3, 9, and 10, relating to an entrepreneurial public sector, working in partnership, continual design interrogation, and the leveraging of community ambition. Which brings me to a second research question that the report deals with concerning what are the key design, planning, engagement, development, and regulatory lessons to be learned. Now, unfortunately, you'll be glad to hear, I don't have time to do justice to that today. Suffice to say that there is a huge amount to be learned from studying successful places. And of course, if the time allowed, then in relation to design, vision and leadership, I would be keen to tell you that there is tremendous value in the public sector gearing up to deliver housing by creating dedicated housing delivery vehicles and joint venture partnerships. I would suggest, for example, that all the government's proposed strategic authorities should certainly have a dedicated housing company. I would mention that as regards proactive planning, site-specific design guidance, notably through design codes and project-based design advice, utilising design review, is quite simply fundamental in order to ensure the public interest is consistently delivered. I would emphasise that community engagement in some form always has value, even if there's no obvious community to speak to or distrust is widespread. We just need to tailor how we do it more carefully, as happened at the Mallings in Newcastle, where the architects regularly engaged people in the local pub around a dismantleable cardboard model. I would definitely want to tell you that on the affordability of design quality, it was telling that so many of the projects took a patient approach to recovering investment as part of a larger, longer term strategies aimed at turning around places perceived as uninvestable, using design quality as the necessary stimulus. And with regard to the regulatory and delivery journey, I might mention that many of the planning and highway standards that are routinely adopted around the country are fundamentally incompatible with delivering new homes in disadvantaged areas, and often need challenging first before we can do anything sustainable or viable. But I don't have time to tell you any of that. So instead, I will conclude by emphasising that there is no single route to achieving high quality, inclusive, sustainable urban development in disadvantaged locations, but instead there are many routes. Likewise, there is no single set of consistent lessons that apply everywhere. So we have choices. And the report we've published today can help us to think about what the right routes might be in different circumstances. And this needs to begin, I would suggest, with every local authority adding 2 critical questions to one that they are no doubt already asking. How are we going to deliver enough new housing? But also, how are we going to deliver enough high quality new housing? And how are we going to deliver enough high quality new housing for everyone? Inevitably, some locations are more difficult than others to develop. Equally, if the will exists, then there are always ways and means of tackling inequality head on through an investment in design quality. typically in partnership and almost always requiring strong public sector engagement in the process. Ultimately, if high quality housing development can be delivered in some of the most challenging urban environments in the UK, as the 20 stories show, then it can be delivered anywhere, but we need to choose to do so. Our report, Tackling Inequality in Housing Design Quality, has, we think, shown many of the answers. So the question is, what are we waiting for? Thank you, everyone, for listening to me. You can download the report there through that QR code, and I'll hand back to Paul and for some responses. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. That's fantastic. As I'm sure some of you would have seen, the link to the report is also in the chat. I think Julia put that in there, so thanks very much for doing that. And I see there's some questions coming through, so please do keep putting questions in the chat. But while you have a think about what you might want to ask, I am going to turn to our panel of respondents and might begin, if I may, with Joanna Averley, Chief Planner, please.
Thanks, Paul, and congratulations to Matthew and the team and all your colleagues who've been putting this report together. As ever, it's incredibly thoughtful, it's evidence-based, it's engaging, and it cuts to the issues of the day and the issues that we need to deal with. So congratulations. All I'm going to offer is a sort of few reflections. One is, I think the Gascoigne estate was one of the estates that we evaluated in 1993-94 when we were doing the first study, which was called London's Residential Environmental Quality. And way back then, we looked at the conditions of different housing schemes in London at the time. And tried to establish, what were, this is when I was in consultancy, Llewellyn Davis at the time, what were the sort of literally the what bits that made a place inherently successful and attractive and of quality. And I pretty much think the Gascoigne estate was one of them. And what's interesting about that, and what I always reflect on, is this conversation has very thoroughly moved on from the what. What makes a place successful, and isn't that a really powerful starting point for all of us as practitioners and decision makers and thinkers and researchers? So we know what good looks like, but more importantly, we know how good places can have the conditions, the attributes to function really well for those that live there, those that pass through, and for the environment and for nature and so on. And I think that is a really strong and important starting point for any of the work that we are all collectively delivering on the ground. And that is very much reflected in national policy in the NPPF National Planning Policy Framework updates that we did before Christmas, that design quality and sustainable development are at the heart of our objectives of the planning system. So back to Matthew's, I'm really pleased, Matthew, you talked about stories and understanding the journey of projects. And a good story tends to have three combinations. It's about people, and you've definitely drawn out how different agencies, but ultimately, and very importantly, often individuals in agencies, drive change and commitments to quality. It's about place. So a good story will always tell you about context and place, and good design always starts from the place. And it's really striking about the different variety of design responses to the schemes and the stories that you're telling, which I think is great to see. And finally, it's about context. Is it contemporary? Is it historic? Is it in a context that's economically challenging? What do the community think about it and feel about things? So I'm really glad you've used the word stories, because what you have recorded in the report and in your brilliant summary of it are the fact that those stories give us overarching messages about the conditions for success. And as you rightly drew out at the end there, it's not one factor that comes to play to create a great place and the conditions for success, but it is many, and it's a layering of factors. But that also that people are at the heart of it, and the sort of leadership that's presented on design and placemaking, whether it's the client, the local authority, the community, the architect, the designers, the planners. So what I also just wanted to reflect on is, I think you're holding two really important principles in tension, and importantly intention, in what you were presenting back to us, Matthew, and it's these two things. One is the successful projects are reliant on people who have got outcomes in mind. They're looking at the quality of the place, its lasting qualities, and what it does for community and residents, and dare I say it, the sort of success of a wider place and its economy. And often that patience comes forward in terms of how people think creatively, but also long term about the investment in place and the qualities that it results. And you talked about patient capital, patient money, patient investment, people taking a long-term view. And that's vitally important. Many of the projects started at least 10 years ago, were in gestation, and some I know will have been in gestation for even longer than that. But you also refer to, I think in your summary at the end, we have to balance patience and we have to also deliver urgently. And the housing needs of this country are very particular. The government has a very clear ambition for 1.5 million homes. That is to deal with the really pressing needs, which, if we all want to be very real about it, children in temporary accommodation and all the negative impacts of that, but also just the basics, economics of housing availability, housing affordability, and people having positive life choices in front of them, often which starts with, do they have a roof over their head, which meets their needs and their requirements. So we have to balance out patience and urgency, or perhaps not balance them out, but deliver those two things in combination. And that's where I think, again, the stories are really powerful, because they talk about the role of local authorities, the role of the client, the role of the landowner, the role of the funder, the role of the planning authority, the role of the designer, and seeing all of those things in combination. So again, just an incredibly powerful contribution to our thinking. I'm with you. I think we, as I said at the beginning, we don't have to talk about what good looks like or could look like. We should be very much in the space of how we deliver, and we deliver at pace. And I think the report is very, very good at drawing out the conditions for success to deliver at pace and enable people to make clear choices as they progress projects. So thank you very much.
I'm mute myself. Thanks, Jay. That's fantastic. Okay, we will move on, and I will ask Amy if you could maybe give your thoughts next.
Thanks, Paul. And it's lovely to see loads of familiar and friendly faces on the screen. Yeah, I'd echo a lot of what Joanna said, and I suppose I've focused on certain bits of the report that really resonate, particularly to me. I mean, I'm delighted that there's a lot of Homes England or our legacy projects involved in. We've got our fingers on some of these, and it's good to see that. I suppose the things that really resonated with me were around the theme around cutting costs through design interrogation, and that kind of constantly doing that throughout the process, which I think is rarer than, quite often just happens at the end, and it's kind of a sort of a slashing rather than a kind of considered process all the way through. And really that kind of that outcomes focus, so that helps you to understand what really matters and where you really have to hold dear to what you've set out, which obviously means you need a really clear idea of what it is that you want at the end. What is the good that you're aiming at? So I think that outcomes focus is really critical, and has helped us to think at Homes England about making sure that we have the position to champion things, because we know what we're trying to champion. I think the other thing that's important that is said in the report is about returning to see what works, and it's fantastic that you've done that as part of this report, but I think it's something that we should all be doing more. And Homes England have been going and looking at our own schemes, a selection of our own schemes every year, just to try and understand what is good practice for ourselves as a sort of learning process, and just sort of, I guess, picking up some of the stuff in the chat that I think is really relevant for us. Is what we're saying is some of the stuff around landscape really is where we are kind of need to really focus a laser eye to make sure that the quality that is so critical to the outcome doesn't get lost. This is a sad story, but it's true, and it's a combination of climate change and and probably our own specification, but we've struggled to take photographs of some of the schemes that don't have dead trees in them. So going back, you see, 40 out of 60 trees are dead on a site. And that means, job for us is, what's our specification? How do we change this? How do we make sure this doesn't keep happening? Because otherwise we just, there's a danger you just repeat the same mistake. So I think that going back and looking at seeing what works and what doesn't is really, really valuable, which will help you with that continual engineering, because, what's the point of spending money on 60 trees if 40 of them are going to die? You need to make sure you're spending the money in the right place to make sure that things do work. The other thing I was just going to say in terms of the leveraging community support, I think Philwood Park is a really, really great example. We with an inquiry by design process, a really interesting project to sort of turn around what was a really challenging area and make what was quite a large park into somewhere that's functional. And that again goes back to what we saw in our returning to see what works. I think there's quite often quite a lot of space shown on plan to landscape, but the functionality of that landscape and how it can be used for the people is really critical. And so that's something we're really trying to push very hard on, to understand how is every bit of space contributing to what you want the place to be. And I suppose my general overall comment is it's quite hard to do good stuff in well-heeled areas. It's not even that easy there. And I suppose I'm just kind of wondering, what are the things that we can do to make this easier for the good outcomes to happen everywhere? Because these are outliers, these are places that have really fought for it, which is fantastic to see. But actually, even in the well-heeled areas, there's an awful lot of rubbish still happening. So how do we make sure that this is the kind of more normal thing to happen? That's it from me. But yeah, it's excellent, as Joanna said. Really, really interesting stuff, and thanks for doing it.
Thanks, Amy. I think that's a great thought to end on, is how can we deliver it brilliantly everywhere. Okay, we shall move on. And next I'm going to ask Sowmya to maybe tell us a bit about how the New Towns Taskforce is going to deal with some of these challenges.
Thank you very much, Paul. Am I audible?
You are.
Thank you. So thanks, Matthew. A very timely and interesting report. Housing is in everyone's mind these days, good quality housing. I have to say, I find case studies to be extremely powerful to look at in this debate about design quality. And the previous housing design audit in England did that, and this report did that. So I think there's really, it's an excellent methodology. And we obviously have quite a few good examples that we can point to. However, one really difficult problem is that while we can point to all these case studies, it seems to be very difficult to scale up to the next level. And the lessons learned seem to be able to be applied to more modest-sized developments rather than neighborhoods and larger schemes as a whole. So, wearing my New Towns Taskforce hat on, I will say that this issue of achieving design quality in difficult contexts, at pace and at scale, and with consistency, has been consuming my thoughts and that of the task force as well. So case studies can obviously teach us lessons as they've done in this report, and lead to principles. I really appreciated seeing the 10 routes to success. But how do we ensure that these principles make their way into the system? We often, for example, when we see a great project, we talk about the need for a champion, and sometimes there is a champion who can cut through the impediments and make something work. And you mentioned the case example of Nottingham, for example, which was really intent in doing that. Sometimes it's individuals. But I feel we really should not rely on champions to achieve high quality places and projects, however important they may be. And we really do need to have a much more systemic approach to good design. So for me, the two key lessons that you outlined at the end of your presentation that was most interesting on that list was about, the first one was about the dedicated delivery vehicle. And the second one was about making the patient investments. And so over the last many years, we all know we've had lots of design guidance and principles and design codes. Many of these observations are not rocket science. We know what good places look like, what good quality looks like. And even from a sustainability point of view, we have legislation, our building codes are getting stronger, we have social value gaining traction, we develop carbon targets, we have net zero strategies. But the wicked problem seems to be that we still can't build enough good quality or just enough affordable housing, let alone high quality affordable housing. So for me, the link between design and delivery that the report does make is quite key. Lessons from the old new towns teach us that development corporations were a useful delivery model, whether they were local or national, because they lasted decades. They had a remit that spanned a long period of time. They had the authority to be proactive and visionary. They had the power to sort of commission the right kind of projects, housing with the right brief. They had the power to assemble funding. And I think we need that kind of long view implementation to achieve what the report suggests. And related to that is that second point about a long view approach to sort of patient investment. And often a payback model with a 10-year time frame looks quite different from one that has 20, 30, maybe even 40 years. Are there ways where we can aggregate funding so we're not looking at funding for each project one at a time? And would that actually help us deliver more consistently? So, many of the people on this call would be designers or custodians of design quality, but I firmly feel that we must understand and engage in real delivery thinking. Otherwise, we'll continue to have many ideas about good design, how to achieve it, a few examples to show for it, but lacking that consistency. And I think the solution lies in that spectrum, thinking from design all the way to delivery. And I would like all of us to engage in that full spectrum. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks very much. Again, I think lots to think about there. Okay, next up, I will ask Vicky if you would like to give us your thoughts.
Hi, I'm Vicky Payne. I'm chair of the RTPI's Urban Design Network and a director at the consultancy Jazzbella Works. So as we address the housing crisis, the RTPI see planning as crucial for creating healthy places and homes. As Matthew said, not just for some people in some places, but for everyone, everywhere. The original housing design audit that preceded this piece of work had a really big impact on me. And it kind of confirmed what I was already seeing really frequently, that poorer communities get worse design. I really appreciate that this report focuses on good examples, so showing what's possible when the right circumstances come together, but it does highlight just how much work is needed to make that the rule and not the exception. So 3 things that stood out to me, and I haven't compared notes with Sowmya, so there is some overlap. But firstly, the importance of somebody having a long-term interest in the site. So it's really striking the degree to which delivery models impact design outcomes, whether that is a local landowner that wants to leave a legacy behind or wants to avoid very awkward conversations with locals down the pub, a master developer or a development corporation who needs to maintain values over periods of decades, or something like a joint venture with a local council. Secondly, the role of policy, and the National Model Design Code and the local design guidance that has come out of that might not be perfect, but it is starting to give local authorities more teeth to refuse poor quality design. And last year I spoke at an event in Rochdale where David Pearson from Trafford Council talked about their recently adopted design code and the ability that was giving them to demand better quality. And Trafford has areas of high deprivation, and I saw a lot of poor quality development firsthand when I lived there. So it's really good to see that there are policy tools that can help to turn that tide. This all takes me back to the role of local authorities. And I think pretty much all the 20 case studies in the report have a very strong public sector role. During the last Conservative government, the most deprived areas received less funding than their estimated needs, while the most affluent areas received more. In 2020, 88% of RTPI members wanted greater powers to reject poor design, but lacked policy support and, importantly, the resources to do so. And then final stat, 61% of planners said that they have the skills, knowledge and experience to focus on design quality, but not enough capacity. So if we want poorer communities to experience better design quality outcomes, then these local authorities need more resources. I don't want to underplay my role as a designer, which I do see as important. I think good design creates the best possible quality from the resources available. It's a problem-solving exercise. But as somebody who entered the profession with the hope of doing good, I want to see a well-resourced public sector that can help to unlock that design magic, especially in less affluent places.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vicky. Okay, next on, Joe from Wates.
Yes, hi Paul, hi everybody. My name is Joe Arthur. I work for Wates Residential, part of the Wates Group, and Wates Residential delivers new homes across the country, generally in partnership with local authorities and RPs. And Joanna mentioned it earlier, the particular case study on the Gascoigne estate, and so I thought it'd be worthwhile sort of contextualising some of the points of the debate and the report with an example in Barking in East London, the Gascoigne estate. So Wates have been in partnership with Be First for 3 phases, all new properties, and the plan is to deliver over 900 homes in those 3 phases. And the challenge for the delivery team, for the partnership, was quite consistent with most urban regeneration sites that the report identifies. So first of all, it's a lack of high quality, affordable homes in the area. And just to give an idea around that and a stat, 3.7 million households in the UK are classed as non-decent, and they cause long-term health issues. So there is a current news story that I was listening to on the radio yesterday, all about black mold, and that is just one example of the health issues that is blighting the country and costs the NHS more than £1 billion a year, just from that particular health issue, let alone all the horrible, obviously, effects that's having on residents. Number 2, there was also a difficulty getting across the estate. So that's pedestrianised areas which were very poor. And also alongside that, there were very few areas in the estate where the community could gather. There wasn't really much character or identity to the estate. So a plan needed to be put forward on how to strengthen the community spirit as well. So the solution, first of all, it was to draw together a team of experts working on solutions, and then actually build on a long-lasting relationship with the customer, which was Be First in this example. And then I mentioned about the community. So all too often, communities are often forgotten about in consultation phase until the very last minute. But particularly in these estates where homes are being changed, regeneration can sometimes feel that it's not for them, or they're not being heard in terms of what they would like to see. Then there were some everyday improvements. So I mentioned about the access across the site, across the estate. So that was making sure there were 0 step entrances, wide doorways, making sure that there were new walking and cycle trails. And then also some play spaces. One example on the play space, actually, there was a lot of M43 compliant play equipment for the Gascoigne estates, which enabled disabled children to play in these spaces along with everybody else, which was a great thing to happen. And then that's also with the play spaces and generally amenity, just promotes that active lifestyle to residents' well-being. And then just a few examples on the design, given the title of this, tackling inequality through design. Other examples were meanwhile use pocket parks and community areas. There was better lighting, more secured wayfinding across the estate. Underground refuge systems were introduced. That actually reduced a lot of the problems with rodents and rats that were blighting the previous estate. And then also this concept of making sure that the street properties, so more the townhouses, were brought into the estate along with the apartment blocks. So these are traditional street properties, but they weren't. They had a good separation distance from pavement, and people were happy to live there without their privacy being impacted. And then one final example, which Matthew touched on earlier, was just about the effect of COVID. And during the lockdown period, actually some of the properties, the internal layouts were amended at quite short notice, just to improve that aspect of home working for all residents across the site. So they were able to continue working from home without being too uncomfortable or in a small space. So yeah, hopefully there was some good context there with the Gascoigne estate. It's a great example to go and have a look if you are not familiar with it.
Thanks, Jay. It's really interesting. Maybe we'll try and organise an urban design group study tour out to have a look at it in the summer. It'd be fantastic. So finally, appreciate we're just about out of time, but Julia, would you like to give us your thoughts on behalf of the TCPA?
Yes, thanks very much, Paul. So I'm Julia Thrift. I'm the Director of Healthier Placemaking at the TCPA. I really welcome this report. It's incredibly rich with very practical and inspiring information. So thank you very much for it. I think lots of people will use it. A few things I'd like to highlight. It talks about planning in the two senses of planning, the regulatory sense about what you must do and what you mustn't do, but also the visionary sense of setting a really high quality vision for a place and corralling people around that vision and helping that vision be delivered. And makes a very strong case for that aspect of planning, adding significant value. And I think in some of the recent commentary around planning, the value that good planning adds has been lost from the conversation a bit. So it was good to see that there. And as well as adding development value, we should recognise the value that good housing brings to society as a whole. So BRE estimated a few years ago now that poor quality housing costs the NHS £2 billion a year in terms of treating sickness, but costs society as a whole in terms of wider costs about 18 billion a year. So there's really good reasons why we should be investing in ensuring that everyone has a decent home to live in. I really welcome the focus on communities and working with people. England is a very small country. Wherever you try and build something, there will be an existing community. There will be people already living there who have ideas, who know the place, but also who have health needs. And I would really recommend that information such as the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment that sets out the health needs of a community informs any new design to ensure that not only does it create a great place for the people who move into it, but it also helps improve the well-being of the people who already live around and about. I also really welcome the mention of post-occupancy evaluation. I think sadly that the built environment sector isn't that brilliant at looking at what works, learning from it and feeding it back into the next stage. Through my work, I've worked increasingly closely with people in public health, and they're really hot on doing that. You look at the evidence, you do something, you see what worked, you learn, you do it better next time. And there's much to be learned from that. So we've been talking about how to mainstream this. It's really important. We know that areas of low land value have communities who tend to have the worst health, and areas with high land value have communities who tend to have the best health. So it's really important to think about how do we mainstream this. A lot of the case studies that you show, it sort of comes down to exceptional people doing exceptional things. And we need to move beyond that. We need to move it to a stage where ordinary people doing their ordinary jobs can achieve good design in areas with low land values. There are lots of things in the report that lead towards various different conclusions, but I'd just like to suggest one idea. The system we have for land value capture, so section 106 and in some places still, exacerbates inequalities. In areas of high land value, where you've got communities who tend to be healthier, it generates higher values that can be invested into the site. You tend to get better quality homes, better quality spaces. In areas of low land value, as we've seen from your report, the quality is squeezed out. So those areas that already have communities with the worst health will get the worst housing, and that will exacerbate their poor health. So the current system we have for land value capture exacerbates health inequalities. To put it crudely, of course, there are some exceptions and some places where that won't be true, but generally speaking, that's what's happening. So I wonder whether we should be moving towards a system that perhaps top slices some of that value and spreads it around a bit more, so that those areas where the land value is very, very low don't always get the worst quality homes. And I'll leave that with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Julia. That's fantastic. I think through all of the, well, both the original presentation from Matthew and also all the respondents, I think there's lots of kind of interesting aspects to this and food for thought. There's also been an awful lot put in the chat, and apologies, we are out of time, so I'm not going to be able to come to do some Q&A, but we'll certainly capture that chat and pick up a few of those points going forward. It may well be that we look to do another event as a follow-up, because I think the fact that we hit about 426 people, I think was the most I saw on there, shows how important this is and how interested people are in this topic. So we'll certainly look to come back to it, and maybe we can kind of pick up on a few of these follow-up themes, or sort of do a deeper dive into some of the individual aspects of this over the next few weeks and months, because I think the interest is certainly there in looking at how we can deliver it. And also just to say that our Urban Design Group conference this year, which will be in Ipswich on the 2nd and 3rd of October, we're going to focus there very much on how we can sort of look at delivering design quality for everyone. So again, we'll sort of pick up on some of these themes and ideas there. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us and giving up your lunchtimes today. Please do download and read the full report and sort of take time to digest it. And like I said, we'll certainly be picking up some of those ideas again. If you'd like to join us, Monday evening is the next Urban Design Group event. We've got an in-person book launch for Dr. Philip Black's book on applied urban design at Cowcross Street. So if you're in town on Monday and looking for something to do Monday evening, come and join us, and I'm sure we can have a chat about some of these things then. So thank you all very much.